Welcome back to On the Bucket with Rob Allen. I've got a wonderful guest today, Steve Stanitzke with Belimo. Steve, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about maybe what's going on with you in the interim, and we'll get into how you got into the industry and where you grew up and all that stuff.
All right, sounds great. I really appreciate the invitation, Rob, and looking forward to the conversation today. Again, Steve Stanitzke. I lead Belimo's sales in the U.S. Like Rob, I'm also live in the Atlanta area, although kind of on the other side of the world from Rob as far as Atlanta goes. Been with Belimo for about 8 years, but I guess we'll go through some of the history
Yeah.
that
So
got me
as the
to where I
premise
am
of the
today.
yeah, and 40 something years in the industry. Is that what I heard earlier when we were talking? Not yet. Okay. All
Yes,
right.
yes,
Fair.
yes. Yeah, no, I try to keep that a secret. No, I'm just kidding. Yes,
Hey,
over
that's
40 years, over 40
you
years
got to
now.
be the first 2-year old to ever enter
Thanks
the
for
building
that.
space. They good. Yeah, absolutely. So as you listeners, you know, the premise of the show on the bucket, we just want to talk about where people grew up, what life was like growing up and transitioning into how they ended up in our industry. So then from there, we'll learn a little bit about what's going on with Steve and Belimo. Good little conversation today. So where did you grow up, Steve? Where part of the
Sounds
country did
good.
you
So I did not
born?
grow up in Atlanta. I grew up in Michigan, in a
Okay.
community on the east side of Detroit, and actually went to school at University of Michigan. And that'll probably lead into a conversation about how I got into the HVAC industry to begin with.
Nice. Did you stay in Michigan, elementary, middle, high school, all the way
I
through?
did.
Did you do?
I did, as a matter of fact. In fact, so my parents never moved from that area. And yesterday was a bit of an end of an era. My mom,
Oh, wow.
unfortunately, passed away in March at the
Oh, no.
age of 93, though,
Wow.
93. So, Rob, she was a realtor. She held her last open house at age 90. So,
Wow.
we can talk about some of my influences and work ethic and that, but we accepted an offer on her house yesterday. And that was the childhood home that I had grown up in since I was 5 years old. She had
Wow.
been in that house for 60 years, and
Wow.
so a bit of an end of an era.
Wow.
Yes, I spent my entire childhood and high school all the way up through high school years.
That's that's not crazily uncommon, but not very common. Especially me. I felt like I lived at 30 different places and I'm really not exaggerating very much. That's pretty neat. Are you gonna get to go up and have you already gone through the house and kind of done the nostalgia and all that, or is that on
Oh
the
yeah,
list?
yeah, yeah. I did that at the beginning of April and took pictures of a lot of things, and it was interesting. My dad was in the Navy. He was an officer in the Navy, and I knew he had photographs from his Navy days. If you remember the old slides, the carousel slides that would be presented. So this is the day, it was before computers and PowerPoint, but he had all his photographs on slides. Well, I found boxes of slides and had those digitized, and wasn't sure what was on some of them. Man, I found my parents' honeymoon pictures, a lot of pictures when I was growing up as a little kid, and a lot of pictures that I had never seen, and some home movies that we got
Wow.
digitized. So yeah, we cleared everything out of there in April, put the house on the market on Tuesday, and accepted an offer yesterday. So
Wow.
yeah,
So you had a little Clark Griswold moment. Hopefully you didn't get locked in the attic when you were going through the slides. Remember that in the
yeah, I
Christmas
do.
vacation?
No, no, I did not.
But that's got to be pretty neat to go through and see, all that stuff. Then now that they're digitized, you've got them, whenever you want to look at them or wherever you want to post them. It's really neat.
Yep, for sure.
Only child? Do you have siblings?
Child.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Really
No
cool.
siblings. So when we talk about the memorial plans, my father passed away 10 years ago. And so you just think about it, estate planning and all. There was nobody to argue with. It all did fall on my shoulders. But
Yeah.
yeah, only child.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure that made some things a little bit easier, but then I'm sure there's still complexities and all things to work through and making sure that you're honoring the legacy and all that
Exactly.
stuff. So sports, hobbies growing up, where'd you land there?
So growing up, I didn't play any varsity sports in high school. Went to a very large high school in Detroit, very competitive to get any of those varsity teams. But did play some tennis, some golf, and music became a bit of a
Man,
passion. So you see this rack of keyboards over my shoulder here. I actually played in a
I thought that
band.
was the world's largest laptop. That's a keyboard. Got it.
Those are two keyboards stacked on top of one another.
Wow,
And I did play in a band when I was in high school and in college, and had a lot of fun with that, and
that's
made some
neat.
lifelong friends along the way.
So were you playing gigs and stuff
Yeah.
in bars and that kind of thing,
Not bars. We were
or
too young for the most part,
okay?
but we'd play high school dances and, fraternity parties in college and that type of thing. We did
What's
play a couple paid gigs in the Detroit area.
very
My
neat.
big my big claim to fame, if you've heard of Bob Seger and that
Yeah.
musician from Detroit, so he won the same battle of the bands that our little band won about 10 years before us, albeit.
Wow.
Well, my only claim to fame in the music industry.
Well, that's neat. Yeah, I've always been anyone that has a musical, either, they love music, a music appreciation, or they're even better if they can play some kind of instrument. I can't do either, right? I'd love to have, I listen to music, but I don't have an appreciation for it. And there's a few people here at Stromquist that will talk about all the greats, and it's who's the best guitar player, and I don't even have any clue that would be, and these guys want to debate back and forth. I've always thought that was so neat. What's your favorite genre? Do you have a favorite genre?
So I have three different genres, Rob. I like Nashville singer-songwriter type stuff. I'm a big 80s fan, given when I grew up. And I also like the old progressive rock stuff, the Genesis, yes, Pink
Mm,
Floyd, and all that
mm,
stuff. So diverse musical taste. So everybody, if you play guitar, you have a guitar hero. If you play keyboards, you have a keyboard hero. My keyboard hero was a guy named Keith Emerson, who was in a band called Emerson, Lake and Palmer. You're probably too young for that, but back in the 70s, they were a big act. And that top keyboard is actually one of Keith Emerson's
really?
keyboards that I purchased at auction
Wow.
from his estate. So a little bit of history there.
Wow. And so did you say his genre is he like 80s music type
Seven.
or 70s? Neat. So, and then you said Nashville singer-songwriter was like that would be like a Chris Stapleton type thing, or
Yeah, but I don't lean towards the country side of things. It would be
okay.
probably some artists that you're not as familiar with, like Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors, and people that play like mid-size venues. Yeah.
Nice. So I see some records. Do you have a best guess count on how many you got?
So Rob, people ask me that. I'm not sure. I'm going to guess a couple thousand, and then if you could see the rest of the room, probably about 3,000 CDs that I never sold. And people come in here and say, and I say, yeah, I get it. I understand Spotify. I know I can stream all this. I use Spotify, but I
Yeah.
still just like the physical aspect, man. And actually, it was during the pandemic when I wasn't traveling and I started to realize how much stuff was getting reissued on vinyl that I started purchasing vinyl again. And it kind of started building that collection back up. So it's 50 years of collecting.
Wow. Do you know Chuck Chittick that works for Stromquist?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
He would love to hear and talk. You guys could talk for three lunches, I bet, on all that stuff. I know he's got a ton of vinyl as well too. Is it an acquired taste vinyl, or is it like any music person would say absolutely vinyl sounds the best? What's the
You know what? I think it's up here in your head as far as the people that say, oh, yeah, vinyl sounds the best. There's just something to me that's old school about picking up that record, taking it out of the sleeve, putting it on a turntable, and listening to it. So if I'm between teams meetings or that, when I'm not traveling, I will just grab an album and toss it on. And just still something for me about the physical aspect. So to me, it sounds a bit better, but I know it's just psychological.
That's really neat. Now, you said your dad was in the Navy, right?
Yeah.
So unique to me that you would have a parent in the Navy and live in your lifelong home forever. So how did that work out? How were you not moving around to different bases and
Yeah, no. So my dad was in the Navy, and then he spent a few years in the Navy, and then moved into, guess you might call it, kind of the corporate world. So there was a large department store, iconic department store in Detroit called J.L. Hudson's. Ended up being purchased by Target. But when it was with J.L. Hudson's, he was a contract buyer for their furniture group and worked there for 25 years. And then he ended up spinning off and becoming a manufacturer's rep. But when I say that, people think, oh, an HVAC manufacturer's rep. No, contract furniture for hospitals, universities, and that type of furniture. And I did that up until he was 70 and loved it.
wow, wow. Um, was one of your parents more influential over you? One you would say more was a mentor? Did you have someone outside of your parent that was a mentor to you?
I mean, they both were in different ways. I never forget my dad said, "You always want to surround yourself with positive people. When there's
Hmm.
people that are dragging you down, those are not the people that what you want in your circle. Surround yourself with positive people." My dad was such a positive guy. And I do think that kind of rubbed off on me in terms of optimism and kind of approach to life. And I would say loyalty and work ethic. With J.L. Hudson's 25 years, and when he was that manufacturer's rep, so loyal to that brand that he was representing. And I would say my mom, I already said my mom was selling real estate until the age of 90, still holding open houses, just loved it. And it kept her sharp. And
Yeah.
I think some of the value I saw there is my mom built this incredible network. Now, my network is much different. It's within the HVAC industry, as long as some friendships that I've maintained, along the way outside of the industry. But I think I could see the value of that network as I was growing up. So they both had tremendous influence over.
Yeah, that's things are starting to connect a little bit. I remember, I won't name names, but when you and I first met, you said, "Hey, let's grab lunch with John Smith, right? We'll use a fake name." And I went, "I don't have access to John Smith," but you were just like, "But wait, whatever." And so I think you probably are networking is just kind of maybe secondhand to you a little bit, and you tend to meet a lot of people, and I also say you have a my experience with you is you're very relatable, and I think that you can talk to the people in various roles of varying responsibility and various background, and you can create a connection. I know that you're very welcoming and warm, and there may be another side to you when you need to have it, but that's kind of your general kind of demeanor, which I think is a great thing.
No, thanks for that. I remember when I first started out of the industry, and we'll get into that in a moment, one of my early mentors, I started out in as a sales engineer for York, and this was in Cincinnati. We'll back up a little bit before that, but he pushed me to meet one new person every week. And that sounds like a
Wow.
very simple thing. And by the time I got to week 83, I was like, okay, are we still doing this? He said, yeah, absolutely. So it didn't mean a new customer, per se, but a new individual. It could be a new designer or a designer at one of the consulting engineering firms or somebody at a contracting firm, perhaps on the project management side that I haven't met. And it pushed me, but I could understand the value of kind of expanding your circle and establishing some of those relationships.
So at some point that was hard for you. How did you go about doing that? Anything you can give to the listeners on maybe how to start to approach people if you want to meet a new person every week?
A lot of it was really just kind of putting yourself out there. I would go to, was very involved in ASHRAE back then. In fact, I was on the board for the Dayton, Ohio ASHRAE chapter, and we won chapter of the year one year. And I was involved with the Association of Energy Engineers. So through that, I would meet some folks.
Mhm.
But if I was, calling on a consulting engineering firm, I would just ask them about clients and users in the area and what type of systems they had installed in their buildings to think about opportunity. And then I would try to get an appointment with the facilities group there. And so I just think about, you think about healthcare systems, universities, other types of end users, at that time to establish a preference for the York brand. It wasn't all that hard. But
Mhm.
after a
Yeah.
while, I would say it became a little bit more of a challenge as I expanded that network, but it was a good challenge. It just, for some reason, it's something that stuck with me.
Yeah. So you're still doing it. I'm going to start doing it. This is a hot take. This sounds like a great idea. And to me, a little bit, some people feel a little pressure from that, right? And I tell our sales team, you've always got to bring value, right? You call someone or interact with someone, take their time 2 or 3 times, you don't have value, they're going to quit answering your calls, right? Especially today with all the noise that we have to put up with. If the goal is meeting a new person, once a week, and I'm assuming sometimes you're like, what, I met a new person that I spoke with for 15 minutes at the coffee shop. That's my one person. I'm sure there was weeks that were like that, but I just, to me, it feels like it kind of lessens the barrier for entry a little bit, just to say I'm going to meet a new person, and then you can bring value with that. It's pretty neat, pretty good.
So
One
I can
question I
back
love
up
to
a
ask.
bit. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go. What were you going to say?
No,
Back
no, you
up.
go. You're the,
So my Okay, so we'll come back to whatever that was here in a minute. But the question I love to ask everybody, I've asked everybody so far, is your first car. What was your first car?
My first car, Rob, so I had accepted the job with York, and I knew after I completed training, I was going to get a company car. So I didn't have a car in college. So I really just needed a car for the next 6, 8 months. So I bought a 1973 bright yellow Firebird. Had a steel. Car was noisy. It was fun to drive. I knew I was going to only have it for 6 to 8 months, and that was my first car.
I asked this question to somebody else that came on. They basically had the same story. Well, I knew out of college I was going to get this job that had a company car, and but they had something in college, and it was a Monte Carlo, and I thought that was kind of neat for this person. But wow, I just company car right out of the gate. That's not so easy these days. But that's really cool. So, what was the company car? You remember?
Gosh, what was the company car? It was some classic.
I
I
think the other
honestly,
guy was
I
a, I
don't
think I think
remember.
the other guy was a Mercury Cougar or something like that.
I remember my second one was a Mercury Sable, but before that, I want to say it was some sort of Chevrolet sedan. I don't remember exactly what it was.
Wow.
Yeah.
My first car was a four-wheel drive 1979 Datsun pickup truck that was my stepdad was a truck driver, and they had a lay down yard and stuff, and so it was their shop truck. And so um, they couldn't keep up with the key, so they somehow bypassed it and put a push button start like big trucks would have.
Yeah.
And then the parking brake eventually wore out, so I went off to high school with an old beater truck that had a little brick and a rope, and that's how I would chalk the tire because I couldn't. It was a manual shift, and my friends loved to go hop in my truck and move it on me, and so it was almost a weekly thing of where do they move my truck, and so that was kind of funny for me. All right, so then where'd you go to school? Where'd you go to college? Big Blue?
I did. I went to, the SEC and ACC fans out there. I'm sorry, Big Ten guy. But yeah, did go to Michigan, industrial engineering graduate from Michigan, and had a great experience there. And that kind of leads into, unless you were going to ask more questions about University of Michigan, which we could talk about that for a while. But
It's okay. Let's move on.
yeah,
Go Dogs.
no one cares about the Wolverines. But I thought I would share. You think about, at least I do from time to time, random inflection points in your life where things happen, and it kind of takes your life in a direction that you think, wow, if that wouldn't have happened at that moment, or if I mean, who knows what path I would have been gone. So I remember being a senior at University of Michigan and interviewing on campus, in their recruiting center. And at the time, most of the positions I was interviewing for were, I would say, traditional industrial engineering type positions. One of the offers I ended up getting was for Eli Pharmaceuticals, a plant engineer in West Lafayette, Indiana. But then I had an interview with Square D for technical sales. I had never really thought about technical sales at all.
Mm-hmm.
But then it started clicking with my mom being in sales and real estate. My dad, by that time, had this manufacturer's rep business, and I saw how much they enjoyed what they were doing, and I was intrigued by the Square D opportunity. And then I started signing up for some technical sales interviews. And just a quick story I'll tell. And again, because it's just one of these random things. So, Rob, you might imagine my last name gets butchered from time to time, people trying to pronounce that thing.
Yeah.
And so this was maybe my third or so on-campus interview by this time. And everybody, Stanzik, they were struggling with my last name. They would come out, shake my hand, and I'm sitting there and I hear this, Stanitzke? I'm like, sat up. I didn't see anybody. I walked down the hallway and I see this gentleman with his arms folded, sitting back with a big grin on his face. And I said, do I know you, sir? He got out his business card. His name was Bob Heinitsky with TZKE on the end. Circled that TZKE, handed it over, and he was the local district manager for York, for the applied equipment business of York. Whatever it was, he and I made a connection that day. And one thing led to another. And so I flew to York, Pennsylvania, did the whole interview process. But I also had an offer from Arthur Anderson in their consulting group. And this Bob Heinetzke had heard I was debating on what to do, and he called me. He said, "You are a fool if you don't take this offer for you from York." And how much pride he had in the company and enjoyed what he was doing and the passion. And because of that man, I accepted that offer
Oh,
with York way
wow.
back when. And I just think about, I didn't know who York was when I signed up for that interview and could have
Yeah.
easily gone down a different path. That was the only pure HVAC industry related interview that I had on campus,
Wow.
and
Wow.
been here ever
And
since.
yeah, probably at some point you were, oh, this will do till I find what I want to do or
Yeah.
whatever, right? We
Yeah.
all seem to kind of have something similar like that, but then clearly you've built a legacy and a long withstanding career, and that's pretty wild. The Itskis, right? That's what brought it through.
Yeah. And they, when I accepted the position with York, it was with the understanding that I wasn't sure where I was going to be placed, so to speak, after that as a sales engineer. And I was a couple months into the training, and they said, "How about Cincinnati, Ohio?" And I said, "Well, I've driven through Cincinnati on the way to Florida. That's it. Don't know anything about it." And took me there. And I ended up spending 10 years in Cincinnati. And I think about friendships that I made there and kind of getting my feet grounded in my career for the first 5 years as a sales engineer. And then my last 5 years as a manager for Southern Ohio and West Virginia. Again, it's kind of random how that opening came about, but I had
Yeah,
a fantastic experience down in Southern Ohio.
a lot of Buckeyes in Cincinnati or
Well, I was
not
going to say I
really?
had to strip my car off. Any University of Michigan references, you would not have found this Michigan helmet in
Yeah,
my back window. No, not a lot of Michigan fans down there. Although I got very involved in the University of Michigan alumni club down there. In fact, one of the fellows that played on the basketball team in Michigan when I was at school there, he lived in Cincinnati, and he and I, for a little bit of time, ran that University of Michigan club, and that was a great experience.
what did they think about that semi-final playoff game a few years back? Who were they playing? I can't remember. A team in Athens, red and black, Georgia.
Just we're going to get to my family in a little bit. As long as they're not playing Michigan, I'm a big Georgia fan. I daughter went to Georgia, been to many Georgia games, but yes,
Nice,
yes, yes,
nice.
yes. That
Oof,
was
that was a good game.
I was tempted to go to that game because it was down in Miami,
Yeah,
but didn't make it. Thankfully,
yeah,
it was not the
yeah,
game to be there if you were a
yeah.
Michigan fan. But hats off
So
to
let's
the
talk about your
dogs.
family.
Yeah, you
Tell me
got it.
about your family.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you got it.
what's
So my wife Amy is actually in business development for a contractor that does painting and specialty coatings. So
neat?
she and I have gone to some BOMA events together, and I go find the HVAC people, and she goes find the people that
Nice.
care about painting and coatings. But that's pretty neat. Prior to that, she was in the senior living industry for many years in
Okay,
marketing and business development. So she and I are coming up on our 21-year wedding anniversary here in a couple
nice.
weeks. We're a little bit of the Brady bunch. We have a blended family. We each have two kids. The kids were 6, 8, and 10 when we got married, and they have each carved their diverse path. So
Neat.
our son PJ went to business school at Georgia Tech. Was thinking engineering, went to business school, and he's now a VP in the world of finance in Manhattan, living in New York City.
Wow.
Then we have a daughter who's out in California, married somebody in the Air Force at Travis Air Force Base, and she heads up the special education program for the high school within a charter school system in California. Her passion has been special ed, special needs kids.
Where's Travis Air Force Base?
It's in Vacaville. It's a bit or near Vacaville. It's between Sacramento and San Francisco, closer to Sacramento.
Got it. I asked my younger sister, someone based in the California National Guard in Fresno, so I kind of flicked a little bit of a similar thing. And then all right, so then your
So,
next
but
next
she was a teacher, a special ed teacher, special needs teacher in Gwinnett County schools. But then when she
neat.
got engaged, moved out to California. Then we have a daughter, and so she went to Georgia College, by the way. And then
Okay.
we have another daughter who got her degree at Emory, and then went on to get a master's at Penn, at Wharton School of
Wow.
Business, and she now works for Deloitte. She did move back here to Atlanta and works for Deloitte. And then the oldest daughter went to University of Georgia, had a fantastic experience there. She actually followed a little bit in her dad's footsteps and played in a band in Athens and played the 40
Nice.
Watt Club and did all that. And she kind of shares a passion in music as well. So she is coming up on her 10th anniversary with a company based in Atlanta called Sixth Man, that you will never
That's
have heard of. They are now part of Norwegian Cruise Lines. So they do music festivals on cruise ships. And now she's one of the leaders there, and she's actually on part of the Norwegian leadership team now. In fact, this week she was down in Miami, a Norwegian leadership meeting. But they've branched out. So Rob, they started with one music themed cruise, and now I think they do maybe 25 a year. But some of those they've branched out. Savannah Bananas. I know you were just down in
yeah.
Savannah. So Savannah Bananas baseball team, they actually did a Savannah Bananas cruise in 2024, sold out, as you might envision. They're doing another one in 2026. But yeah, all the four. It's funny, you watch them grow up. You see them; their interest in sports and different things. Then they each carve their own path. They all four went to different colleges within the Georgia system. And
Yeah.
yeah, very
That's great.
proud of their accomplishments. One piece of advice I might offer to the listeners and viewers out there. So there are
Millions.
three daughters in that mix, right? So,
Yeah.
we all save up in our 529 accounts for, education. That's all good. You need to have like a 599 account or something for weddings. Because Rob, I think I may have shared this with you that all three of those daughters got married in the same year in 2023. It was really neat. March, July, and November of 2023. So I do have one grandchild out in California, a granddaughter with another granddaughter on the way as well.
Oh, that's great. That's a great story. Everybody's sort of spread out. It's probably you probably like them to be a little closer, but they all feel like they're intelligent. There's a lot of really neat things there, but probably more so than anything, happy. Seems
Yeah,
like everyone's happy, and I know that's
very
probably
much.
most likely what
That
you wanted best. That's great.
that that is the goal. We're grateful that two are still based here in Atlanta.
Very cool. So let's transition a little bit over into after college. So you already said you worked for York. Maybe hit some highlights for York and Johnson Controls, and then let's
Yeah,
just go right into Belimo.
sounds good. Uh, so I was, as I mentioned, a district sales manager for York in Cincinnati, and then I got a call one day, and they said, "How about Atlanta?" Okay, I don't know a lot about Atlanta. Been there. Seems like a cool town. And this was leading right up before the Olympics were here. So I actually moved to Atlanta in '93 with a little broader responsibility for York. And what was really cool, Rob, is York was an Olympic sponsor. We were a U.S. Olympic team sponsor, as well as a sponsor of the '96 Olympics here in Atlanta. So it was just a fantastic experience. We provided all the HVAC equipment for all the venues that were built here and renovated. And yeah, it was a tremendous experience. Got to meet a bunch of the legacy Olympic athletes along the way, as did many of our customers. So it was a great time to move to Atlanta. Things were booming. And when the Olympics were over, I took a deep breath and said, "Man, that was awesome." But in a way, I'm kind of glad that's done now.
Yeah.
And then I get another call, and they said, "Hey, we're promoting our Southeast Regional Sales Manager to a higher level of position up in York, Pennsylvania, and we would like you to be our Southeast Regional Sales Manager." Took on that broader role of, at that time, that meant the service business of York as well as the applied equipment sales business. And was a regional manager for York. Ended up taking on some other states. And then let's see, I guess it would have been 2005, so 20 years ago. I'll never forget this. I was in a contractor's office in Greenville, South Carolina, and I had respectfully turned my cell phone off during that meeting. And I turned it back on. I'm like, what has happened? Because I had 18 voicemails, and an announcement had been made that Johnson Controls was acquiring York. So the next call I got that day was from our vice president of sales, and said, "We need a representative to basically live up in Milwaukee for the next few months
Mm.
to be part of the integration team." prior to the acquisition being formalized to figure out, well, how does the York equipment business fold into the Johnson Controls portfolio? And there were other people on that integration team, as you might imagine, but I was the representative from a field sales perspective. So a great experience. Booz Allen was a consulting firm that kind of oversaw that. And, you'd sit in these meetings, Rob, and they would start showing proposed org charts. And I'll never forget, one day I walked in, I said, that red X that you have through that box right there, that's my box. So that's cool if we're going to do that. But let's maybe talk through that a little bit. But it was a super interesting experience, and there was a gentleman, and if any of the listeners and viewers out there know Johnson Controls at all, a gentleman named Tom Gannon, who had been there forever, kind of took me under his wing a bit. And out of that integration team, I was afforded the opportunity to be regional vice president for JCI for a new region that they called the Mid-Atlantic, from Virginia up through New Jersey, for the systems, so controls business as well as equipment. So P&L responsibility for about 7 or 8 branches that resided in that territory. I said, I'm not moving from Atlanta. That's right. And the kids were right in that sweet spot of middle school, about to go into high school. And they said, as long as you're up for the travel, you can do it from Atlanta. So I did that for a couple of years. Then the gentleman that was running JCI in the Southeast retired, and I reconnected to the Southeast for JCI, and kind of had some more responsibility eventually provided. And then towards the end of my tenure with JCI, I was responsible for the southern tier of the U.S., so New Mexico to the Carolinas and south, for service, controls, HVAC equipment, and the performance contracting group. It was about 2,300 employees and about $1.1 billion revenue portfolio.
So at that level, when you're doing that, are you setting strategy mostly? Are you just looking at numbers and trying to make decisions there? Like what does that job entail on like a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis?
It's a great question. I will tell you that it entails empowering your leaders. And you've got to have good leaders, which fortunately I did, running portfolios within that larger portfolio. Shoot, man, I'd like to say I was spending 80% of my time on strategy. That was not the case. You get pulled into different things. I was certainly involved in some of the larger opportunities that we would pursue, like the international concourse at the airport and that sort of thing, both on the operations side and the sales side. A lot of it is trying to get the right people in place, in those roles. I would say also, when you're working for a company like Johnson Controls, and it was a great company in terms of, man, I made a lot of friends there. I learned a lot there. But you can imagine that there's a lot of people there that kind of have their own vested interest, or somebody that cares about the equipment business, controls, fire alarms, security, and then even within that, some sub portfolios. So, certainly there was a bit of reporting up, we'll say, that comes along with that, because each of those stakeholders wants to know what's happening within your portfolio of business. But some of that was healthy too, because when I would do that, I would reflect on, okay, what are some adjustments that might need to be made in the business? And
Yeah.
but it was a lot of time on the road.
Yeah, I bet. So it's encouraging to hear. I was actually talking to a CEO earlier this week at the conference I was at,
Yeah.
and I asked him sort of the similar question. His company is 4 times bigger than Stromquist. He had the same answer basically. It's empowering people and assuring that you got your people on the right seat on the bus, and removing obstacles and removing hurdles, and creating some strategy for them, but to basically, help them stay within a guideline, but then, achieve their aspirations and goals. It sounds easy. That's far from easy, but
Yeah.
it's good.
You want to build some tethers there that are based on trust. And, I told you about the value I place on networks, that building relationships internally and have that level of trust in both directions. And you got to build it, you got to earn it. But I found very important. And that's something that's kind of stuck with me too.
Yeah, that's really neat. So you spent a great deal of your career with JCI, York, before JCI acquired them. You're now at Belimo. There's exciting things going on. 50th anniversary, I think, this
You
year.
are correct. Yeah. 50 years.
Tell me about Belimo.
Yeah, so Belimo, for those who don't know, was founded in Switzerland, in a little town east of Zurich, 50 years ago this year, by a couple folks that had broken off from Staffa. So, I mean, very, very humble beginnings. If anybody in the industry, by the way, is curious about those humble beginnings, there's actually a book on this topic. The secret of Belimo's success. If you're not in the industry, don't read this book. It's going to be quite, it gets very technical at times, but it's also philosophical at times too. And, but it talks through the humble beginnings of Belimo and the invention of the direct coupled actuator back in 1977 and how our product line evolved over time. And in the late 80s, a gentleman named Warner Buck made his journey across the ocean, rented a house in Danbury, Connecticut, got some catalogs, established some inventory, and
Wow.
started traveling around being the evangelist for Belimo. Realized pretty quickly we needed a logistics center out west to be able to satisfy demand out there. Established a logistics center outside of Reno, Nevada, and Sparks, Nevada. Built it out from there. This year, Rob, will pass 1 billion Swiss francs in revenue for the first time, which is about $1.2 billion US. You can imagine as a percentage, the Americas started small. I mean, our stronghold was Switzerland, Germany, and then kind of built out in Europe. But now we're to the point that the Americas are a bit over half of the revenue generated we've got about 2,500 employees now. A little over 600 of those are based here in the Americas. Just tremendous growth in the last 5 years. We'll talk a little bit about, if you'll allow me to, what I think some of the things that have kind of gotten Belimo to this point and make the company great. But we've hired, I don't know, I'm going to guess 150 people here in the Americas in the last 5 years, mainly to expand our throughput and capacity in Danbury, but also just as we've grown, we've created more opportunities for people and hired some new people, and we're definitely in growth mode.
Love that. Let's continue down that. If I say something that is not for the, I'm going to ask you a question and we can edit it out if it's not an appropriate one and telling too much of the inside story. But when I met you the first time, something that impressed me was remember the first time supply chain. Everyone in our industry remembers when supply chain was just wild, right? And couldn't get stuff. And you had made the statement, we're actually going to hire more people to keep up with the demand. So business was shrinking, everything was going down. But you at Belimo, you guys made the collective decision to go hire more people. Is that something appropriate to talk about? Can you talk about
Of
that a
course
little
it
bit?
is,
Because
yeah.
that was
Well,
a
and I'll even go beyond that, Rob. So Belimo is a company, one of the things that really attracted me to Belimo is it's a company that stays the course, has privilege of focus. All we do is valves, actuators, sensors, and meters. That's all we do. And we invest 7 to 9% of our top line revenues each year back into innovation, R&D, future product development. And the year that the business went down, our CEO said, well, as a percentage, we're going to need to increase that. Like we're going to double down on R&D when some other folks may be in more of a retreat mode, so to speak. We hired over 100 people in Danbury over a couple year period. But Rob, I'm going to tell you that kind of the heroes back there are supply chain, logistics, production. And from a supply chain perspective, I really have grown to learn how Belimo respects and treats their suppliers. And I think that's critically important. When I was in Switzerland one year, it was interesting. We had a bit of a scavenger hunt, and suddenly I found myself at this industrial firm that builds our plastic housings for our actuators. And they just talked about the long-term relationship with Belimo and how they feel that they're an extension of the Belimo culture. For a lot of our critical components, we insist that there be multiple manufacturing locations in more than one country. And there were just a lot of things that kind of got us through that supply chain crisis and with very, very little disruption that we were very grateful for.
yeah. In my network, there's two companies that are big outliers when it comes to that, and Belimo is by far, one of those. And it takes a lot of guts to make that call, and to push it through to get buy-in from the rest of your team that's what we're going to do. But um, I was just talking to somebody the other day. It's I heard Belimo's having some supply chain issues. What do you mean? Oh yeah, I heard it's like double the lead time. Like, what? Oh, you mean like from 3 days to 6 days to get a valve? And oh gosh, and that's a true story. I
Well,
mean, true
I
story.
believe it is, and I'm gonna give you a little bit of insight, you and the listeners here, a little bit of insight there too, in terms of what's happening today, and this will lead into the data center market discussion. We really don't have supply chain issues, quote unquote, but we don't have infinite capacity either,
Hmm.
and nor do our suppliers.
When you say infinite capacity, you just mean to
Like,
produce product or
yeah,
warehouse it, or is that,
well,
what do you mean by infinite capacity?
like I told you that our Belimo's revenues this year will be about $1.2 billion. If a
Hmm.
switch flipped tomorrow and said, well, now it needs to be 2 billion, we don't have the capacity to ship out $2 billion of products in a year. And it has to do with the physical space. It does have to do a little bit with the number of people, but also you think about the production of the subcomponents and that. And our demand right now is every month we're setting a new record right now. And I don't think I'm sharing any secrets when I say that about 20% of our business right now is tied to the data center market. Exciting for some of us that live here in Atlanta, because Atlanta has now been
Yeah.
kind of a second hub to Northern Virginia, but it is incredible what is on the boards, the design board, so to speak, over the next 5 years also. And so you think about people taking risk, and right now, you know, we're trying to get visibility down to the product level on some of these massive data centers. And even before orders are placed, we're placing orders for subcomponents and doing things to increase our capacity. Quite a bit of our manufacturing takes place in Switzerland, but it's been a challenge, and it's funny that story that you relate to. You can imagine there are a lot of sales folks that have been with Belimo a long time, and
Hmm.
it shakes their earth a little bit too if suddenly the lead time is 6 or 7 days instead of 3. But I will tell you, quite honestly, our goal is to get it back to that 3 or 4 days. It's just not going to happen overnight, but I do think it'll happen this year. It's just there's a bit of a ramp up that's taking place right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that,
So
if you talk
good
to
job,
our,
you and the
our,
team.
our president, Jim Furlong, he would say that at times he feels like he's almost running two different organizations, kind of the legacy core Belimo business and this data center business. We've actually created a separate team to support that business, both from a sales, application, product management, logistics, you name it. Now, it's not a true separate business stream from a production standpoint,
Hmm.
but it's created some really neat opportunities too, Rob. Some of our folks, they don't know what their next career move might be within Belimo. Well, one of our successful salespeople on the West Coast, Melissa Olson, has evolved into our global leader over our data center business, and had folks in Danbury a couple of weeks ago from all around the globe. You think about the companies that, we don't transact with any of those data center companies at all directly, but you can imagine that we work with them on specifications and that sort of thing. And they expect us to behave like a global company. They're global, we're global. And so that
Yeah.
level of coordination has been important. So we've been kind of building out our capabilities there. The whole goal, Rob, is to do this with as least disruption to the rest of the business as we possibly can. I had we'll just call him one of your peers in the business saying, can't you make all these data center customers wait at the back of the line? We've been with you for forever. Well, no, our system doesn't quite work that way. And oh, by the way, the folks that are buying the product for these data centers are, in many cases, our historical legacy
Yeah.
customers that have pressure to get that product out to the site too.
Yeah.
Our whole goal here is to continue to increase capacity and increase throughput. Our throughput is more than double, obviously, what it was 4 years ago. And it took a lot of things to happen to be able to do that.
Yeah. It's just incredible. You guys continue to be the goal for a lot of other companies, and the fact that you take all that extra business on, you continue to grow at the rate that you are, and you keep up with it. And you've already touched on it, but you seem to have incredible people on your team. So there's incredible people attract more incredible people, right? And that's a good thing. So
So, I mean,
you've had a lot of.
to that point, Rob,
Go
if you don't
ahead.
mind me just interjecting for a moment. So our CEO, who I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to meet him, Lars, it's so important to him as we grow to keep the culture of Belimo. And Yeah, I look at the culture of Belimo and how do you sustain that with this growth? And our CEO, Lars, has put out a program which he calls our values made visible. And he has established 4 core foundations around credibility, customer value, operational excellence, and solution leadership. And to commemorate our 50th anniversary this year, we are holding some sessions, cross-functional sessions with our people. What does it really mean to live that? How do you mentioned a moment ago, you want to be able to continue to add value. What does that really mean? If you're a salesperson, let's not look at what can this customer do for me, but how do you add value to our customers through training or other means. And I've really admired it. When I had the opportunity to go to the Belimo Europe and Middle East sales meeting not too long after I joined Belimo, I guess might have been 2019, and I was amazed that it's a very similar culture there in terms of people they love our industry, fairly low ego, smart people that respect one another. And I think that has been another key to Belimo's success is I mentioned how we treat suppliers, but how we treat our own people as well. And I think that
Yeah.
extends over, I hope, to our customers.
Yeah. The old saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, that just seems to always shine through. Keep talking about you a little bit specifically as a leader. You've had a lot of roles, a lot of responsibility. I mean, you've mentioned several times how people is the most important ingredient in your bowl of chili recipe. What are some of your thoughts on leadership that you could pass along to anybody else that wants to get better?
Sure. And sometimes I think I do some things instinctively that I don't really acknowledge have an impact. And later people will come by, they'll come back 6 months later and say, when you gave me this little piece of advice, I'm like, wait, let me remember that conversation. But it really, I do think it's important in a leadership role to establish that trust with your team, and that empowerment I think is important. Collaboration, whatever you can do to foster collaboration with customers, obviously, but both also internally. We've launched a little program with a tag name Synergy, and so we have several synergy projects. So think about within the company, just like how we support trade shows, for example, in terms of what does that look like, and how do we manage that whole process, and cross-functional team of people getting together, offering ideas around that. So back to leadership. So I'm going to give Jim Furlong, our president, credit for that because he said, I think we need to put a tag name on this so people get what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And I think the power of collaboration is super important. Like, don't always feel like you need to make a decision in a silo. You may not always agree with somebody else's perspective, but the value of getting perspectives from a larger group of people, I think, is important.
To that, we do. I don't want to cut your train of thought
No,
there, but
no.
at Stromquist, feedback by and good purpose is our mantra, and it's exactly what you just explained. And so, all the roles within the company, obviously a much smaller organization, but I desire feedback from everybody, and we work that into all of our department meetings, our one-on-ones. We have a suggestion box, is the easiest way to
Hmm.
describe it. We get dozens a week of ideas of things that people want to do. It's neat. And it took 2 years to get that, by the way. We had to keep pushing for it. And you build that trust, and people will start to tell you what they think could make something better. And then you start to work that in, and then all of a sudden it puts a multiplier on the amount of ideas you get. Wow, I did this got better. And then we just add the buy-in part because it's not a democracy, right? We're going to make
Yeah.
decisions based on a lot of different data, but your feedback likely went into it. And then if we all just treat each other with a good purpose and understand that through feedback behind a good purpose, we move the ball forward in more ways than one. And it's created great culture and success for Stromquist, and it sounds like you're doing that as well too.
Yeah, that's excellent. And of course, the challenge there too is you got to follow through on things. Like if
Yeah,
somebody's got a good idea and you say, that's a good idea, let's put something into practice. You can't just let that fall by the wayside,
100%.
even though, we're super busy. This synergy initiative, so we have in Danbury a team of project managers for different purposes. But when we decide if we're going to do a synergy project, we actually assign a project manager to make sure
Yeah.
timeline. What are the goals? What problem are we trying to solve? What are the goals? And somebody to kind of keep things on track, which I think has been kind of a neat concept. I think the other thing that I would share, and this part is tough, is being able to foster personal accountability. I think about back to the times when I had operations responsibility at JCI, and I think about the tremendous amount of respect that I built up for the engineering teams, the project managers, the chiller mechanics that really
Mhm.
had that accountability to both the company and themselves and the customers. Boy, those folks were worth their weight in gold. I mean, in terms of, and it's a tougher thing to build because some of it is just intrinsic to who you are. But to the extent that you can build that level of accountability, not just accountability to the company. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about personal accountability and
Yeah.
accountability to customers. I think is super important.
Yeah. Yeah. It really starts with caring. Individual must care, and then you got to care about the individuals. You can't fake that. There's no way to fake that. People are going to figure out if you care, if you don't, and whatever. That's really good. I've enjoyed our time. This
I
is
have too, Rob.
a lot of things. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't talk about, or did we cover it all?
I feel like we could keep this going for another half hour, but I
I
think
know.
that people are going to start getting bored. No, I think it's been a great conversation too. It actually made me reflect on a couple things, knowing that you and I we're getting together. Both gratitude for points of influence in my life along the way and what's kind of helped me develop, and then just reflecting on some things that I think kind of make Belimo stand out a bit, be a bit different,
Yeah.
and something else that I'm just super grateful for. So I've really, really enjoyed the experience as well. I think you did ask me, so where do you spend most of your time? And you asked me that a little bit when we were talking about that RVP role at JCI. Right
Right.
now, Rob, I'm spending a lot of my time doing interviews because we are, hiring. Belimo, it's interesting. We have these regional sales manager positions. None of them have been open for 10 years because it's the same group of people that stick with us. And we've had some openings because we've had some people take on broader responsibility. We had a gentleman in the Northeast retire this week. So we've
Mhm.
promoted a bit from within for a couple of those. One of them out west, I'm looking to fill right now. That's probably going to come external. But then you just really reflect on what's important. What do you try to get out of those interviews? How do you evaluate a candidate? One of the little tips that I just learned recently, you can always learn new things, right? Is in preparing for interviews, I would always go in them with my list of questions, right? But now I'm going in with a little short mini 5-minute presentation about what I believe this role is and and not just a conversation either, actually showing some things. And I've gotten good feedback from candidates that say, well, I appreciate you investing the time up front before we even start talking about your vision of what this role is and where it fits into the company and all that, even for some of the internal candidates. So for what it's
Yeah.
worth, I'll share that as well.
So timing wise, you sort of make introductions and you go right into that. Is that what you do? The little presentation?
Brief introductions on both sides, and then I
Okay.
say we're here to talk about you and the role, but I kind of want to make sure it's teed up so that you clearly understand how I
Yeah.
view the role and what things are important towards success in that role.
And do you think that in doing that, it sort of lets the candidate clearly it lets them know what's important, and then they're probably going to start talking more about what's important,
And
right?
it's all about, for me, giving examples that would tie back if they listen to the things that because now I've told them what's
Yeah.
important. How can they tie back their experiences to, I guess, play into that?
Yeah. I love that. I love that. We're going to start to implement that. It's great. I'm going to meet a new person every week, and I'm going to add that little thing into the interview. Thank you so much for allowing us to
Absolutely.
connect. Full disclosure now, when you were coming on board, I was like, Belimo was everything was great, and you came on, and it's like this outside influence. It's you didn't come up through Belimo, which is what I'd kind of experienced before, and I think you've done some really great things, and Belimo continues to get better as well. And so, yeah,
Thank you so much, Rob.
really,
And the
really
level of
appreciate
respect
you.
I have for you and your organization as well as a channel partner for us. And I was genuine when I said I was honored by the opportunity. I really
Yeah.
appreciated being asked to do this.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right.
Well, guys, another On the Bucket with Rob Allen, Steve Stanitzke with Belimo. Had a great time today. Hope that you'll add some comments if there's some questions that you want answered. And if you liked it, give it a like. All right. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks
Take care,
again, Rob.
guys.
Take care.